sincerely thank you all for having me. I was always been impressed with the Lions Club and really happy to be here because I know we've got the same goal, which is a better, safer community in Montgomery County. So I'm just pleased to be here. Usually when I go to talk to people, I try to kind of tell them how I got to this place in my life to sort of give them a perspective on who I am. So I'll tell you, I've been wanting to be a DA for a long time. Even when I was a little girl, people would go, what do you want to be when you grow up? I didn't just say a lawyer, I wanted to be a DA, which is weird for a little girl to say to someone. And I'll kind of tell you how I got there. I was the kid that was always the one the teacher said to take names when she walked out of the room. I was the kid that took hall monitor and crossing guard way too seriously. That was sort of my personality growing up. I was the rules person. I was the one that, when they said, I'm going down the hall, Lloria, you take names, all the kids went, oh. Because they knew I was going to take them. They put a check by it if I had to. But that's sort of, no, you were exactly right. I'm locking some of them up now, though, so it's interesting. But I always had that sort of personality. And then when I was in the 5th grade, my teacher asked me if I would do the welcome for the 6th grade graduation. And of course, I readily agreed. And when I got up to do the welcome, I didn't so much say the welcome as preach the welcome. I think I may have been the longest speaker on the program that day doing the welcome as a 5th grader. And when I got done, everybody clapped. Everybody in the room clapped. And I was intoxicated. Because in reality, what they probably did was, but in my head, y'all remember when the film of, like when the teenage girls would see Elvis and they would go, ah, and go crazy. In my head, that's what the audience was doing when I got finished. So I was automatically just entrained. I wanted to do that. I knew that talking would be a part of how I made a living. And then I went on, and later that year, Ellen Brooks was running for DA for the first time. And she came and talked to our class. And I knew at that moment that that's what I wanted to do. She taught us about being committed to your community. She told us that even though we were just in the 5th and 6th grade, that we were citizens too and had a part to play. And the thing that impressed me the most is somebody asked her, what does a DA do? And she said, we lock up the bad guys and protect people. And not only did I already know that's something that I wouldn't want to do, but I was so impressed and excited, I came home and told my parents, not only could I do it, but you know girls can do that? She's a girl, and I can do that too. So ever since then, everything I did in college and in law school led to me wanting to be a DA and work in the DA's office. So I got very lucky. Right out of law school, I was hired by Ellen to be an ADA. I worked at that office for 3 years doing various things. And then I got an offer to be the chief deputy in a Black Belt county. And I went and worked in Selma and Wilcox County for 7 years as the chief deputy there. During that time, I was also appointed to the bench in the municipal court here in Montgomery, and eventually came back to Montgomery full time and was hired by Darrell Bailey to be the chief deputy here. And it has been an amazing and blessed experience. I tell people all the time, with the exception of my husband and children, I think my career may be my greatest blessing, because when God's destiny for you meets the reality of your life, that's a contentment that you can't buy. When you know you're doing what God has you to be doing with your life, and your life passion is also your life's work, you can't really ask for much more than that. And that's sort of where I sit today. So I'm nothing but blessed by God. I'll tell you a little bit about kind of how our office works. We do, of course, all criminal cases. By jurisdiction, they have to have occurred in Montgomery County. And we do everything from misdemeanors, traffic tickets, all the way up to capital murder cases. And the way that typically works is the Montgomery Police Department or the Sheriff's Department investigates the case. They arrest the person. Once they arrest the person, within 72 hours, they have to be seen by a judge. And they have to be told, first of all, what they're charged with, and second of all, what their bond is within 72 hours. Of course, we're at those hearings to discuss bond and those sorts of things. The next thing is they'll go to a preliminary hearing. At a preliminary hearing, the judge will determine if we have enough probable cause to move forward to the grand jury. And the grand jury is who I call our great gatekeepers. They're the people who decide whether or not we really have got enough to go forward. They're ordinary citizens just like me and you that got called for jury duty. And the neatest thing about that is they literally, the judge will pick their jury number out of a hat or a box. We don't get to choose them. They don't get to say, no, I don't want to be on the grand jury. They're picked at random, and they're coming, they hear all of the cases, and they tell us whether we have enough to go forward. So it's their decision. They're the ones that get to make those decisions in the state of Alabama instead of us. And probably one of the neatest things about grand jury for me as well is you take 18 people from different walks of life, different experiences, and they serve for 2 weeks at a time. And by the time they finish that 2-week period, they're like best friends. People who would have never met in any other circumstance get to meet and get to sort of be in the foxhole together. And a lot of them continue those relationships on, and it's really a neat thing to see for our community. After grand jury, the defendant is arraigned by a judge. Again, they have to read the indictment to them. They have to tell them exactly what they're indicted for, what their bond is on the indictment from the grand jury. And then we move forward to trial. So that's the basics of how a case gets through. I always remind people too when I'm talking, it's not very easy to get from arrest to trial. Because during that time, the first thing, a magistrate has to find that we have no probable cause to arrest. Then a district court judge has to decide there's enough probable cause to go to the grand jury. And then normal citizens have to decide there's enough probable cause to indict them. And so you have to go through all of those stages before they ever get in front of a regular jury to do a jury trial. You got to get past all of those people and all of those marks who say, we're pretty sure not only that a crime was committed, but we're pretty positive that this person that y'all want to charge is the person that committed the crime. So that's sort of how things move through the system. And I'll tell you a little bit about how our office is set up. Of course, Darryl Bailey is our district attorney, and of course, he wanted me to tell all of you all hello. I think he's talked to you all before. I'm the chief deputy, so I'm directly under him. We have a chief administrator and a chief investigator that report to me as well. So that's the hierarchy sort of the office. We have about 103 employees, 23 of which are lawyers, and we have different divisions. So we've got a crimes against women and a crimes against children division. We call that our family violence unit. We've got a violent crimes unit, and all they do is capital murder and murder cases. And I know you all watch the news, and so you kind of see sometimes what's going on in Montgomery, but usually when I tell people they're surprised that we have right now about 130 pending murder and capital murder cases that are waiting to either be indicted or tried or pled or worked out. So the 4 lawyers in that division, they get a lot of work. They stay pretty busy. We've got a violent crimes unit, a family violence unit. We've got someone who does district court. We have 2 lawyers that do child support. We also collect child support on behalf of custodial parents who aren't getting paid the money they need to support their children. We have juvenile court, and so we have 2 prosecutors that work in our juvenile court. And then we have what I call our mainline lawyers. They're the lawyers that I think do the heavy lifting and the grunt work most of the time. They're the ones that are in the courtroom every day. Of course, most of you all know we've got 6 circuit court judges. We have 2 lawyers assigned to each judge. One's a senior attorney, one's a junior attorney. And they work the majority of our cases, the theft cases, regular assault cases, robbery cases, those sort of burglary cases, regulated motor vehicle cases. They really do the heavy lifting that keeps our system going. And there are 12 of them. So all together with them and Darryl and I, we make, with Darryl, it's 24 lawyers in our office. And so I help manage and facilitate and mentor all of them as well. So if you ever need any of us or any of them, I hope you're never a victim of a crime, but you may just be interested in what we do and the kind of things that we do on a daily basis. Feel free always to come and talk with us. We think it's really important to keep the community safe, clearly. But one thing I love about my boss is he recognizes that part of keeping the community safe means preventing crime before it happens. And we've got a couple of ways that we do that as well. We do a lot of community service. We have an I-Lead program that goes into the school's 5th grade class. We're with the 5th grade class all year. We partner with the police department, and there's some DAs and some officers, and we go once every other week from September to May. And we meet with the 5th grade classes, and we talk about everything from gangs and bullying to, hey, you say you want this big car and big house, let me show you what kind of money you need to make, or what kind of budget you need to have, or what kind of school you need to go to. And it's really interesting to see their eyes get about this big around, because everybody wants, the $1 million house and the Ferrari. But when you tell them you got to go to school a pretty long time if you want to earn those things, we talk about even things like that. We talk about their emotional development and their home life, and we really try to influence them so that they don't come into the system. We also have diversion programs like drug court and pretrial diversion for first-time offenders who've done misdemeanors or smaller crimes, because what we found is once you get a felony on your record, it's almost impossible to get a job. And when it's impossible to get a job, you're more likely to come back in front of us. So we recognize that being able to help people get educated and employed will also help the community in keeping it safer, because they won't come to us in the first place. So that's a great thing that I like about working for our office. We also are in the community with things like Meals on Wheels and other programs. I tell Darryl all the time, I love doing community service, but he makes it even better because I have a 72-year-old. So I get to do my community service on his time and not, drag them out and all around Montgomery on Saturday mornings and things like that. So it's really a blessing to be able to work for him and be able to get out in the community and help people. So if you ever need us, or if you think of a program that you may be in or may be running that we can help, or send some investigators or lawyers or other staff members to help you all facilitate the program, or even just speak and ask questions, that's what we're here for. We're not just here to lock people up and keep the community safe. That's our number one goal. But we're here for the citizens in every way that you all think is appropriate or that you would like to involve us in the community. So please, we're literally and really just a phone call away. So I know I'm supposed to tell you a little bit about myself in the office and take some questions, but usually the first question that I get is, what's the funniest story or the funniest case you dealt with? And I've got a lot of funny stories, but I've got one that stood the test of time in terms of funny. As I told you, I worked in Selma and Wilcox County as well. So I was in Wilcox County, and I don't know if any of you have ever been to Wilcox County or practiced or worked in a smaller community, but everybody kind of knows each other. So it's a really interesting place to prosecute, because the judge may already know the guy's guilty because he goes, I know he's been getting in trouble since he was 10. And so you kind of got that either advantage or disadvantage by the fact that they all sort of know each other. Well, we had a young man who had a bit of a reputation for getting in trouble, and he had allegedly broken into someone's house. So we were prosecuting him for a burglary. And I had the eyewitness on the stand who was the victim's next door neighbor. And he was an older gentleman. He was probably in his late 60s, early 70s by the time he went to trial. And he was a glasses wearer. And he was on the stand, and he was talking about how he knows that was him, he identified him, and the fact we went through direct examination, everything went perfect. He looked honest, I was happy, I sat down with a grin on my face. And then the defense attorney got up and started cross-examining him. Well, he already knew him, and he knew he was supposed to have his glasses on, and all these sorts of things that I didn't necessarily know. So he starts asking him, it was at night, it was dark outside, how are you sure you saw him? Well, his first answer was, look, I know that boy was just before he was born. I know who it was. So he had the whole time, hey, I know this young man is. I've been knowing him all his life. And so he said, well, yeah, I know that, but aren't you supposed to be wearing glasses? And he goes, well, yes, sir, I normally wear glasses. And he said, well, were you wearing your glasses that night? Well, no, sir, I wasn't wearing my glasses that night. So he said, so let me get this straight. You're trying to identify my client as the person who broke in this house, and it's at night, it's far away, you don't know exactly who it is, it's dark outside, and you don't even have on your glasses? And he said, well, no, sir, I didn't have them on. And he said, well, just exactly how far can you see without your glasses? Old man leaned back in the chair and said, well, sir, I could see the moon that night. How far was that? I knew then, when the jury clapped, when they laughed and clapped, I knew then I was probably going to be all right. So I've got obviously tons of stories like that with interesting folks that I've gotten to meet along the way. And that's been the blessing of doing this for a living, being able to meet so many different types of people and help so many different types of people. I could probably write a book with stories that I have, both funny and not funny at this point. But I think I'm supposed to take questions. So if anybody has any? Yes, sir.
Not a question, but a comment. And that is, I want to commend you guys for allowing, in some close cases, voluntarily, the so-called perpetrator to come to the grand jury and tell his side or her side of the story. I know that's risky, but it's fair. And that's utmost fair to you guys. Appreciate that.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And that's something that sometimes people get wrong about us a little bit. People think that the DA's office, and particularly prosecutors, just want to lock up people. Like it's just wake up every morning and see who we can lock up. And while we definitely want to lock up violent criminals, I don't want to fool you and I don't want to cheapen that, we think our job is to find the truth. And whatever the truth is, sometimes the truth is that the police department got it wrong. Or sometimes the truth is we don't know and it's such a close call, I can't go forward with the case because I'm just not sure. Could have done it, but it could have been somebody else. So our job is to be in constant search for the truth and for fairness. And it's a blessing to be able to work with somebody who takes that very seriously, and we do. Yes, sir?
What's the vote on the grand jury to move forward?
You have to have 13 people to true bill a case, and a true bill means to bring down an indictment. You have 13 to get an indictment.
Well, what was Julian saying? Do you get to represent yourself in a indictment in grand jury though?
Typically in grand jury, the defendant does not testify. And the reason that they don't is because a grand jury is done in secret, which means all of the witnesses and all the testimony is taken in secret, so they can't bring their lawyer in. So it's probably the only time in the criminal justice system where I get to ask them questions and cross-examine them, and their lawyer's not there. Now they can step out to ask their lawyer questions and come back and forth, but they're not in there. A lot of times though, especially on close cases, like Mr. Phillips said, it's important that the defendant get to sort of tell his side and give the other perspective, because the victim's going to be there. And say, hey, I know you just heard from the victim, and I know they said X, Y, and Z, but let me put that in perspective for you. Let me tell you how it went from my perspective. And so sometimes they will request to come and testify in grand jury to sort of tell their side of the story as well.
But you don't have to.
No, you don't have to, and oftentimes it's rare that defendants do come to grand jury.
In juvenile crime, do you find that the home situation most frequently is the nomination that causes them to do?
Yes, sir. I would say in juvenile cases, 95% of them come from not just bad home lives, but really, really horrible home lives. And it's very sad. And it's funny that you asked that, because we've had that argument in juvenile court, because I said, when you punish a juvenile, when you set out parameters, you need to do it for the whole family. You have to address the whole family and not just the child, because a child can't really control much about their own life. So you can put things in place for them, but if they learn something and then go back to the same environment, that's not going to help. The main thing is you got to get mom educated. You got to get her making a living wage and those sorts of things in order to improve the family so that child's life will be improved. Now the other side of the coin, and what I've also argued and do honestly believe, I also don't think it's an excuse though. You know, I've known people all my life that have grown up poor or disenfranchised or, you know, raised in tough situations. And being poor doesn't in and of itself mean being criminal. And you ought to be able to not have to resort to those sorts of things, particularly violent crime. So while I do know and believe that affects how these juveniles behave, I still will hasten to say I don't think it's an excuse, particularly for violent crime. And I've made that argument to a judge before. You know, I personally know people who have grown up in just terrible circumstances. And you don't have to be, you know, president of the United States or partner at a law firm, but you also don't have to rob people. You know, you don't have to shoot someone. You don't have to pistol with people. You don't have to do these. Those in my opinion, are different issues. Yes, sir.
Back in 1987, in federal court, Congress passed the federal sentencing guidelines, which at first were mandatory, and then the Supreme Court of the United States said, no, they're not mandatory, they're advisory. I am not a proponent of the guidelines because I think what they did was transfer the power in sentencing from the United States District Judge to the United States Attorney. In state court now, do you have guidelines that you must follow?
We do.
Sentencing, are they mandatory or advisory?
Well, in certain crimes, and most of the property crimes, they are presumptive. And what they mean by presumptive is the judge is supposed to sentence him within that range. However, the state can file for aggravators, and the defense can file for mitigators. And we actually have to have a jury trial on them. But you can go outside the guidelines if we say, hey, I know the crime is within the guidelines, but because of these things, I think it should be higher. Same thing with the defense. They can say, I know the guidelines say this, but you know, he's got a job. So, you know, sister crime, he's gotten a job, he's working, he's got kids, or you know, those sorts of things, and they can try to go below. I understand what you're saying, Judge, and I have to say I totally agree with you, because I think the judge handling the case is the person that's in the best position to make those decisions, particularly because I know at least in the state system they go back to the same judge. So if you try to get in trouble at 18 and you got a particular judge, that's going to be your judge till they retire. So they, you know, they kind of get to know you and your family a little bit and how things work with you and what sometimes the way to punish you, because they've sort of gotten to know what you will react to and what you'll do and not do. So I think that it bothers me a lot, because I don't think that a piece of paper is in the best position to know what a defendant needs to do. I think a person is.